The moment Emily Carter heard the knock, she already felt something was wrong. It was early evening, the kind where the sky turns gray too fast and the house feels heavier than usual. She had been standing in the kitchen of her Vermont home, staring at her phone, wondering why her husband still hadn't called. Daniel was supposed to be back that morning. He wasn't. No message, no explanation. Just silence. Emily wiped her hands on a towel and walked toward the door. Each step felt slower than the last, as if her body knew what her mind didn't want to accept. When she opened it, cold air rushed in and so did three familiar faces. Mark stood in front, tall and serious, his jacket still dusted with rain. Jason was beside him, restless, hands shoved deep into his pockets. Ethan lingered slightly behind, his eyes scanning the porch like he hoped Daniel might suddenly appear. Emily, Mark said softly, "Can we come in?" Her heart dropped. Daniel's friends never came together unless something was wrong. She stepped aside without asking questions. The door closed behind them with a quiet sound that felt louder than it should have. They moved into the living room, standing awkwardly at first, like guests who didn't know how long they were allowed to stay. Emily gestured for them to sit, then lowered herself onto the couch opposite them. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap. "Did something happen to Daniel?" she asked. Didn't try to hide the fear in her voice. Jason exhaled slowly. "We don't know," he said. "That's why we're here." Mark leaned forward. "We were supposed to meet him at the cabin this morning. He never showed. He didn't answer calls. That's not like him." Emily felt a sharp twist in her chest. Daniel was many things quiet, distant lately, even distracted but careless. Wasn't one of them? "He didn't come home," she said. "I thought maybe plans changed, but he hasn't answered me either." Ethan finally spoke. "He's been under a lot of pressure," he said carefully. "At work." In general, Emily looked up. "Why didn't he tell me?" The question hung in the air. No one rushed to answer. The room felt too quiet, filled only by the sound of rain tapping against the windows. Emily realized how strange it was to be sitting with these men, people who knew her husband so well while feeling like she barely knew him anymore. Mark broke the silence. "Daniel didn't want to worry you. He always says you already carry enough." Emily swallowed. She wanted to argue, to say that marriage didn't work that way. That silence wasn't kindness. But the words wouldn't come. She stood and went to the kitchen, needing movement, needing something to do with her hands. "Coffee?" she asked. They nodded as she poured the cups. Memories crowded her mind. Daniel laughing with these same friends years ago, filling the house with noise and energy. Back then, everything felt simple. Somewhere along the way, life had grown quiet and heavy. They talked while they drank. Not in circles, not repeating things, just pieces. Daniel working. Late. Daniel turning down invitations. Daniel saying he was fine too often. Emily listened, her heart beating faster with each detail. This wasn't a sudden disappearance. It was a slow pulling away she hadn't wanted to see. What if he just needed space? She said finally, "Jason." Shook his head. "Daniel doesn't disappear. He shuts down, but he doesn't run." That scared her more than anything. Outside, the wind grew stronger. The storm was settling in for the night. "I'm glad you came," Emily said quietly. She hadn't realized how alone she felt until she wasn't anymore. Mark stood and walked toward the window, checking the weather. "Roads might close soon," he said. "If that happens, we may be stuck here for a bit." Emily nodded. The idea didn't bother her. In fact, the thought of being alone again felt worse. They stayed, not out of obligation, but because something unspoken held them there. They talked about ordinary things at first, told trips, shared memories, moments. That made Daniel smile. Emily found herself smiling too, even as her eyes burned. Time passed quickly. The house felt warmer with voices in it, still every few minutes. Emily's gaze drifted to her phone lying face up on the table. still dark, still silent. As night settled in, a deep ache filled her chestnut. Just worry, but something older. Loneliness. The kind that grows even when someone is supposed to be beside you. Mark noticed. "He'll come back," he said, not with certainty, but with hope. Emily nodded, though she wasn't sure what back even meant anymore. She looked around the room at the three men sitting there at Daniel's friends. It's her unexpected support. Witnesses to a moment she never planned. Letting them in hadn't been about opening her door, it had been about opening the truth she'd been avoiding. And deep down, Emily sensed that whatever happened next, whatever Daniel was facing this night was the beginning of something she could never undo. Emily couldn't stop thinking about what the evening had brought. The house, which had felt empty and cold just hours ago, now carried the warmth of voices and presence. Daniel's friends had stayed, not because she invited them to solve her problems, but because their concern had brought a comfort she didn't know she needed. Mark, Jason, and Ethan moved around naturally, helping with small things, straightening cushions, tidying dishes, even fixing the kitchen lamp that had been flickering for weeks. Each gesture was quiet, unspoken support, but it carried weight. It reminded Emily that life didn't have to be carried alone. As the storm raged outside, they gathered in the living room. Rain splashed against the windows, tapping in rhythm, with Emily's anxious heartbeat. No one tried to force conversation, yet silence didn't feel heavy. It felt loaded with possibility, the kind that comes when people care enough to simply be present. Emily realized that, for the first time in months, she felt seen. She wasn't just a wife waiting for a husband to return. She was a woman whose worries and feelings mattered. The talk began slowly, almost cautiously. Mark spoke first, mentioning Daniel's workload, how much pressure he had been under recently. Emily nodded, feeling a mix of frustration and sadness. Daniel had always been a private man, but she hadn't realized just how much he was carrying on his own. Jason chimed in, recounting a few moments from their recent office project. Times when Daniel had seemed exhausted but refused to show it. Ethan added quietly, mentioning how Daniel had struggled with balancing everything in his life. Emily listened intently. Each word painted a picture she hadn't fully seen before. Daniel wasn't distant because he didn't care. He was overwhelmed. He had tried to protect her from his worries, believing she had enough to handle without him burdening her. That thought made Emily's chest tighten. She realized that much of the distance she had felt wasn't about her. It was about the invisible weight Daniel carried silently. The conversation shifted naturally to lighter topics. Memories of college days and vacations they had all shared. Laughter emerged slowly at first, then more freely. Emily found herself joining in. For the first time in months, she laughed without holding back. It felt liberating, the way a room can suddenly breathe again after being filled with tension for too long. Yet underneath that lightness, a quiet understanding persisted. Everyone in that room, Daniel's friends, herself was connected by care and concern, not judgment or gossip. Dinner came next. Emily had started preparing it earlier, and now with the storm keeping them inside, it became a small communal act. They set the table together, passed plates around, and ate while chatting. Nothing inappropriate happened, nothing forced. It's just people sharing a meal, sharing presents. The act felt almost sacred. Emily realized how much she had missed these simple connections, these moments of shared humanity. As the evening progressed, Emily felt something new stirring inside her. Not romantic, not urgent, something deeper. An understanding of what it meant to rely on others, to let someone in emotionally without fear. Mark, Jason, and Ethan had become more than visitors. They had become bridges connecting Emily, too, her husband, in ways she hadn't expected. Through them, she glimpsed the man she loved, not as a husband who had failed her, but as a human being struggling to manage life and expectations. Questions that had been pressing in her mind all week finally surfaced. Where exactly was Daniel? Why had he shut her out? She wanted answers, but she also understood that pressing for them now might push away the very support that had arrived at her doorstep. Instead, she focused on listening, absorbing every story and memory shared about him. She saw his strengths, his flaws, his humor, and his fears, all woven together into a complex human portrait. Time passed. Outside, the storm intensified, lightning illuminating the windows. The three friends talked quietly, sharing stories about Daniel's younger days, their friendship, and the ways they had relied on each other over the years. Emily contributed, recounting small anecdotes Daniel had shared with her over the months. She laughed softly at moments of mischief, smiled at his kindness, and occasionally felt the sting of his absence. Each story, each memory, built a bridge not just to Daniel, but to understanding her own feelings as well. As night deepened, Emily realized she was no longer thinking about Daniel's absence in terms of fear or anxiety. Instead, she saw it as an opportunity to reflect, to understand, and to reconnect not only with him but with herself. Letting these friends into her home had been an act of courage. It had been a risk, a choice to open her life to others in a moment of uncertainty. And yet, the result was unexpectedly comforting. She felt stronger, more aware, more alive. By the time the clock struck 10, she sensed a subtle shift in the room. The friends weren't just providing company. They were helping her reclaim something she had almost lost: hope. Hope that Daniel would return. Hope that they could all navigate the storm together, figuratively and literally. Hope that emotional distance didn't have to define their marriage. Emily looked at them, feeling gratitude that she hadn't expected. She realized how rare it was to find people who could care so deeply without judgment, without expecting anything in return. They had arrived out of concern for Daniel, but in doing so, they had given her a gift she hadn't realized she needed: presence, understanding, and the quiet reassurance that she wasn't alone. Then a thought struck her, sudden and insistent. This night, this strange, unplanned night, might be the turning point for all of them. Daniel's absence, while painful, had opened a door that had been closed for too long. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about connection, about seeing clearly what mattered, and about realizing that love isn't only about being together. It's also about support, understanding, and empathy. As she stared out at the rain, Emily felt a quiet determination settle inside her. She would wait for Daniel, yes, but she would also embrace the present moment. She would allow herself to feel, to learn, to connect. Letting his friends in had done more than fill her home with conversation. It had started a subtle healing, a recognition that life's storms could be weathered, not alone, but with the people who could remind her of the strength of love, patience, and understanding. The night stretched on. Conversations meandered. Laughter blended with quiet reflections. Emily noticed small changes in herself, a softening of frustration, a new patience, and a renewed sense of clarity about what truly mattered. The presence of these friends, who were once peripheral figures in her life, had become a catalyst for growth, and yet, amid the warmth and shared moments, a shadow of uncertainty lingered. Daniel was still out there somewhere, facing his own challenges. The unanswered question hovered: what exactly had kept him away? Emily didn't press for it yet. She sensed that the answer would come, in time. But what mattered now was the transformation occurring quietly within her. By the end of the night, Emily understood something profound. Life could be unpredictable, people could disappoint or retreat. But the connections forged in trust and concern could change the way a moment or even a lifetime was experienced. She had opened her door, and in doing so, she had opened her heart, discovering that care and understanding sometimes arrive in the most unexpected forms. As the friends settled into chairs, preparing for a long night together until the storm passed, Emily felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. This night wasn't about fear anymore. It was about growth, about empathy, about seeing her world through a lens she hadn't realized she'd needed. She had let them in physically, but more importantly, she had let them in emotionally. And that choice, she knew, would shape everything that came next. Even as the rain fell harder, even as shadows danced across the walls, Emily felt a quiet hope. Daniel's absence was painful, yes, but it had brought clarity, connection, and an unexpected reminder that love wasn't just about presence. It was about understanding, compassion, and the willingness to open oneself to the people who cared. And in that realization, she found the strength to face whatever came next.